We are real glad that you're here tonight. You know, about 16 months ago, Presbyterian Global Fellowship was formed out of a sense of need for vision within our denomination, and we put together a conference in just a matter of a couple of weeks. Fell all together. We met a year ago, last August, and you came, and we had a great time together at Peachtree Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, and we thought, you know, it went well. What happens if we try it again? Only next time, let's try it in a venue that doesn't look so much like a church. So here we are, George R. Brown, Houston, Texas, and we're thrilled to invite you. 1972, I was just about ready to graduate from seminary. And I filled out what in those days was called the dossier. Some of you who are from the other generation will remember the dossier. It was a multi-paged way of introducing yourself to the world. Today we call it the PIF, but back then it was the dossier, and it includes narrative information and also a number of lists that you would check off, and you would identify your strengths and interests in ministry. On one of those lists, there were 13 pastoral activities, and a person was invited to rate them according to their interest, you know, pastoral care, preaching, teaching, things like that. One of those was evangelism. There were 13 things on the list. I put evangelism number 13. Last on my list. Didn't think anything of it. Couldn't think of a good use for it in the world. Had no experience with it. A pastor called a couple of months later, before I'd received a call. I think he was from Seattle. And he said, listen, I just want you to know I'm not going to hire you. But I do have a question for you. Why did you put evangelism number 13? And you know, I haven't been able to get that question out of my mind for 35 years. It's really the Jesus question. Who is this man? If he is who he says he is, if he can do what he says he can do, if he came into the world to do what he says he came into the world to do, then what should we do about it? I have spent the last 35 years, as I said, wrestling with that question. Some of you may remember Bruce Thielman, a great preacher from an earlier generation in the Presbyterian Church. Bruce, in a message one time, made note of a study that was undertaken by the publishing house Gossett and Dunlap. They asked several dozen historians and teachers from around the world to identify the greatest moments in history. And after their deliberations, they came up with these things. First of all, greatest moment in history. Interesting first. It'd be really interesting just to go around and what would you have on the list? Well, anyway, these teachers and historians came up with the discovery of America. I gather most of them were from America. Second on the list was, and this one made more sense to me, second on the list was the invention of the movable type printing press. It makes sense. In third place, there were 11 things tied, and in fourth place, there were 5 things tied. The discovery of ether, X-ray, air transportation, the writing of the U.S. Constitution, and the life of Jesus Christ. But after years and years, 35 years of asking question 13 in my life, I have come to the conclusion that Jesus Christ is not tied for fourth. In fact, he's not alone in fourth. He's not in third or second. Jesus Christ alone is first, preeminent in history, King of kings, Lord of lords, the one who can do what he says he can do, the one who is who he says he is, and the one who came to do what he says he's going to do, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And his impact on history is truly staggering. James Kennedy a few years ago wrote a book, maybe you've read it, called What If Jesus Had Never Been Born? Interesting. He looks at history, all the key things that you and I conclude make up history, and he charts the influence of Jesus in each of those areas. And after I read the book, I was fully convinced that the world in which you and I live today would be largely unrecognizable if Jesus had never been born. His influence on healthcare, the arts, social services, government, the economy, you can go on, is truly staggering. Now, in many respects, we've forgotten his influence. But if you trace back through, he is so responsible for the world in which we live today. And why should that surprise us? He is the source of all things and the destiny of all things. And here's where it gets really interesting. The vehicle for taking that gospel good news into the world is the church. And its task is the task and part of evangelism. Now, let me give you my definition of evangelism. I'm sorry, I can't do anything without telling stories. You get tired of stories, but it's just the way. I don't know how to do it. Sorry. A few years ago, I decided to help my wife out in the kitchen. I'd never really done much cooking, but I thought, well, I'll take a chance. So I arranged a few things that I could make, and I made them every Thursday. That was my day, cooking. A bag or a box or 6 items or less, I could make it, these 4 things. One time we were about to take a trip across country, and so I thought, what can I make that would be fast and wouldn't require cooking, that we could just eat at the last minute because we were leaving late in the day? And I thought, chef salad, that would be perfect. I'll make a chef salad. I'd never made a chef salad before, but I thought, how complicated can that be? I mean, really. It's some vegetables and some cold cuts and some cheese. And then at the last minute, I remembered eggs. You've got to have some hard-boiled eggs. My problem was, now, some of you are going to laugh at this, I know, but I didn't know how long to cook an egg to make it hard-boiled. Now, some of you are going to smile and laugh, but you don't know either, do you? Well, I had no idea. All I knew was about a 3-minute egg. I'd heard something about a 3-minute egg. So I cooked it for 3 minutes, set them aside, they cooled. She came home. We had the chef salad. When I opened the egg, of course, you know what it was. That's the timing for a soft-boiled egg, so it was all runny. And now this next part, I'm happy to say, was not my idea. It was my wife's. She said, you know, they're almost cooked. I wonder what would happen if you put them in the microwave. This is true. So I was calculating how long would you have to put an almost cooked egg in the microwave to cook it completely. And I thought, well, how about a minute and a half? So I put it in. You know the story. It's not exactly rocket science now. We got partway through, big muffled explosion. I look in the microwave, egg everywhere. Clean out the microwave, but I've got 3 other eggs. So I'm thinking to myself, about when did that egg blow up in the microwave? And I calculated it was about 30 or about 50 seconds. So I thought, I think I'll put it in, the second one I'll put in for 35 seconds. Kind of a Mr. Science project going right now. So I put it in, set it for 35 seconds. I told you we were going out of town, so I went outside to roll up the hose. And while I was outside, I heard this scream from in the kitchen. I walk in the kitchen, and there is my wife, Terry, sitting over here, still here. She's standing in exactly this pose. And she's got egg everywhere. She's got it in her hair, she's got it in her eyes, in her mouth, on her clothes. The egg is on the floor, it's on the ceiling, it's on the cupboards, it's on the counters. You have no idea how many places one egg can go. It seems as though it was still one egg when she took it out of the microwave, but as she was carrying it to the sink, that's when it exploded. And it went everywhere. And that's my definition of evangelism. Only I have to say to you, it used to be that I thought it was our job to take the good news of Jesus Christ out into the world. I thought that's what we were supposed to do. What I'm discovering right now is that evangelism is going out into the world where God's already doing the work to join him in that work. It's different. And here's a problem that we have with the church. We're off course a lot of the time. You know, somebody did a study once of all the moonshots and came to this conclusion: they were off course 83% of the time. I asked a friend of mine who worked for NASA, I said, how is that possible? Off course 83% of the time? He said, no, it's really true. He was responsible, I think, for the last 10 feet down to the moon, and he said it's true. Because they couldn't be under propulsion all the way, they drifted most of the way to the moon. And when they drifted, they got off course. But there were these course corrections every once in a while, predetermined. And in those course corrections, the retro rockets would fire and the lunar vehicle would be set back on its right course. And it does seem to me that even though the Church of Jesus Christ has been off course many times in its history, there have also been important moments ordained by God, course correction moments where the retro rockets fire and we get back on course again. There have been lots of them, councils of the church, the Reformation of the church, revivals in the church. And I believe we are in such a moment in the Presbyterian denomination right now. Time for a course correction. Because People are desperate. People are dying, physically dying, emotionally dying, spiritually dying. And you and I are the ones who have been given the grace of Jesus Christ to take into the world. You know, I was with my son Grant in the Caribbean a couple of years ago. We were body surfing and we got into a bad place. And I thought we were going to drown, honestly. It's the only near-death experience I've ever had. We were in a riptide and we could not get back to the shore. I hope you can appreciate what it's like to be 10 feet from your, at that point, probably 20-year-old son, and you're looking at each other thinking, this could be it. We couldn't reach each other and we couldn't get to shore. It's the only time in my life I've ever cried out, help. Only I didn't cry out, help. I cried out, help. You know how humbling it was for me in that moment? I remember it distinctly. You know, my wife told me an interesting thing. Every time we go down to the Caribbean now, she always tells me that story. We always rehearse it. And she said to me this year, something I'd never heard before. She said, you know, I saw you in the surf that day, and I thought you were just having fun. I was almost dying. And from the outside, it looked like I was just having fun. Do you have any idea how many of the people who live around you in this world, how many people who seem to be having fun are really having a near-death experience? Sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're in over their head. Sometimes they know they're not. Sometimes they know they are. The world is dying for this gospel of Jesus Christ. And it's been given to you and me. And here we are, course correction moment. And here's, in my opinion, at least two reasons that we've gotten off course. First of all, some of it has to do with focus. Michael Frost, who you'll hear from in just a few minutes, has a great way, at least in his book, The Shaping of Things to Come. It just crystallized some things for me. It's been so helpful. He says there are two ways. Well, some organizations are defined by their boundaries, and some organizations are defined by their center. It's an interesting concept. Some organizations defined by boundaries, some by their center. He says in Australia, for instance, when it comes to ranching, it's hard to keep track of the cattle because the land is so arid. It takes many, many, many acres of land to feed one cow. And so for just a few head of cattle, you've got to have thousands of acres of land. And how do you keep track of them? You can't build enough fences to keep track of them. So the key is the well. As long as the well has sweet water in it, no matter how far the cows wander, sooner or later, they'll come back. You'll know where you'll find them. Now, it seems to me, when I read that, I thought, that's what I've been experiencing in this denomination that I've been in all of my life. That we have spent an awful lot of time in recent decades, really, an organization apparently defined by our boundaries, by our fences. And please understand, I'm not knocking fences. I think fences and the boundaries are important to us. We've learned a lot by these fences that we've built. But if all we are is a series of fences, we will die. We're nothing without the well. So I'd like to think that at least a part of what PGF is a way to begin to concentrate, to refocus ourselves on the well. Jesus Christ, his merciful work, his saving power, because he is who he says he is. He can do what he says he can do. And he came to do what he said he came to do, to take away the sins of the world, the Lamb of God. Now, the second problem that we have, I think, is a problem of baggage. We pack a lot around. You know, we as a church have been around long enough now that we've got a lot of stuff we're dragging with us. I was interested in the news a couple of weeks ago, I guess a couple of months ago now. North of here a little ways, there's a place called Conroe. There's a lake there, and it's a popular place to live, but very rural. And there was a story about a man who went out every morning to take a walk. I think it was a 5-mile walk. He went out one morning to walk by himself. It was early, before it was light. He was walking along, and he began to hear this telltale sound behind him. The sound, if you're a walker, this is a sound you know and you dread. It's the sound of the claws digging into the concrete. It's the sound of the dog coming after you. So he turned around, and sure enough, here comes a pit bull after him, all slobbery and full of teeth. Life flashed before his eyes just as the pit bull arrived, and he did the only thing he could think to do, which was to reached out his hand, and somehow, by the grace of God, his hand managed to connect with the dog's collar. You know, if he'd caught any other part of the dog, it wouldn't have helped him at all. But he caught the dog by the collar. And so somehow he could manage to keep it at arm's length. So now what's he going to do? He's miles from home, 5 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, nobody around, and he's got this raving lunatic pit bull in his hand by the collar. What do? Well, he backs home. And then when he gets home, he fumbles around in his pocket, and he finds his keys, and he opens the door, and he goes in the house, gets the telephone, he calls 911. I'm being attacked by a pit bull. I've got it right here in my arm. Come fast. After a while, the police arrive. They find the guy standing there at his house, pit bull at the end of his arm. Well, they come up and they check the dog. The dog is dead. Really, I'm sorry for you pit bull lovers, but he had gripped the collar of the dog so tightly that he strangled it. So all this time, he'd been dragging around a dead pit bull. You ever have the feeling sometimes in the church that we're just dragging around something that's dead, and we ought to let it go? So part of the problem we have as a church, in my opinion, shared possibly by some of the others on the leadership team of PGF, they'll tell me later whether or not they agreed. We have a focus problem and we have a baggage problem, some things we need to let go of, and a place we need to resharpen our focus. Which gets me a little bit closer to PGF. Let me say a couple things about what we're not. First of all, we are not a mission-sending agency. People think we've been around a long time. We've been around about 16 months, and there's just a handful of us. About a dozen of us have been working on this during this period of time. It's not like we have corporate headquarters anywhere. We're just trying to figure out what God is doing right now in our denomination and how we might be called to play a role in that. We're not a mission-sending agency, but here's what we believe. We believe that you are. We believe deeply that you are and that you have it in your heart to send out the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world. Another thing that we're not is a program agency, a curriculum writing agency. So don't write to us and ask us for the latest program on this or that. But again, we believe you are. And what's needed is we need to know each other better, and not only each other in this room, but all around the world, because we believe God is up to something in each of our congregations, and we're trying to get connected to each other. Another thing we're not is a new denomination. But we'd like to think that God might use us in a particular way to sow seeds of life in this denomination. When I lived in eastern Washington, there was a disease that went through the lawns called necrotic ring spot disease. There was nothing you could do to cure it. It started out as a little hole, dead hole in your lawn, filled up with weeds, and then it just grew, and it just wreaked havoc in lawns. Well, then the people at the extension agency came up with a necrotic ring spot disease resistant seed. And the deal was you aerated your lawn, punched thousands of holes in it, and then you overseeded the lawn with this seed. And it would sprout and grow, and it would stop the advancement of the disease. Well, we did this the summer before we moved to Houston, so I never got to see what happened in our lawn until a year later when I went back and I saw that it had worked. And PGF, in a sense, is a way to overseed what God is doing in the church right now for new life. Now, my dad was a Presbyterian pastor, and he had two hobbies. The first hobby was golf, and the second hobby was gardening. One thing I learned from my dad out in the garden, sometimes he'd stick the shovel in the ground, and you'd hear the sound of a clunk. And when that happened, you knew what was going on. He'd hit a rock. And the question always was, how big is the rock? And the only way you know is to keep on digging. Well, a few of us put the shovel down in the soil about 16 months ago, and we felt a clunk. And we've been trying to figure out how big it is. Is it the size of a loaf of bread, or is it the size of the Rock of Gibraltar? We actually think it's bigger than a loaf of bread, because everywhere we look around the world, it seems as though God is doing something that falls into this category of the missional church, which you'll hear a lot about before we're done in the next couple of days. We think it's probably as big as the globe. And we're trying to figure out what that is, and we suspect that's why you're here as well. Now, we would love for you to sign on with us, be a part of the PGF movement. Nobody owns a movement. You can only join it. This is God's thing, and if God's doing something, then maybe you'd be inclined to join in with this movement. And if you do, we're going to ask you to do 4 things. They're outlined in your materials, so you can review those later. First of all, we're asking you to engage study. And this is really a basic fundamental study of Jesus. Just go back and read about Jesus again. You know, after Pentecost and after the Ascension, it seems to me that Peter went back and he just reviewed the life of Jesus and all the things that had happened in history. He saw how it fit together and it produced that incredible sermon. 3,000 people were brought into Christ because of that message. And it was because he went back and just looked at it again. So what we'd like for you to do is to engage again the study of what Jesus Christ is doing in the world. Absorb yourself in the life of Jesus. Every day, make yourself more familiar with who he is. You know, we have some interns at our church, many of you do as well, and I was talking with one of our interns a couple of days ago. I asked him, what's the greatest experience that you had? He was in the children's area, and he said, the greatest experience I had this summer was teaching kindergartners. He said, you know, I've been through the children's program here, the youth program here. I'm a college student right now. I know so many of the theological issues. For me, and it's gotten so complicated, he said, but for me it was just so great to come back to this. Who is Jesus? Our daughter delivered to us our first grandchild this year a couple of months ago, and she said, Dad, I can't stop looking at him. She said, I love him more every hour. I love him more every hour. That's what we're asking. First of all, that you engage a serious study of Jesus that will allow you to love him more every hour and see all the places he's at work in the world. Secondly, that you begin to take on some new activities that will stretch you out of your comfort zone. You know, it feels really different having PGF here, doesn't it, from last year? We're in a church. Everything felt familiar in a church. Boy, it feels weird doing it in an auditorium downtown. But this is where we need to learn to figure out how to do ministry. I tell you lots of stories about people in the congregation I serve, but they're in your congregations as well. People who just determined that God is doing something exceptional and calling them out of the familiar and into the unfamiliar. I think of Sandy Griffith, who's a member of our congregation. She came to me a couple of years ago and she said, you have to understand, Sandy's been everything in the church that I serve. But she said, I feel called to go downtown to Ben Taub Hospital, which is a county hospital. And she felt called to do something with the babies. When she arrived there, she discovered that many of the babies in the county hospital were not held very often because their mothers had other siblings and they couldn't afford child care, so mom could only be there occasionally. These were special needs children, you know, who'd be in the hospital for a period of time. And so Sandy decided, she came to me and she said, I need a rocking chair to rock babies. I said, you know, I'll get you a rocking chair, but I think there's more to it than this. Well, that rocking chair turned into several rocking chairs and a bunch of women going down there and rocking babies. And then that, in turn, turned into a room where the siblings of these babies go because they were just running up and down the hallways. We took a room and painted murals on the wall. And that, in turn, got the attention of Ben Taub Hospital. And they ended up putting in 2 full suites, 2-bedroom suites, to help families transition with special needs children. Amazing. It's amazing. It started out with a woman who felt the need, felt a call of God to rock babies. Well, anyway, you could tell the stories too. I hope you'll have a chance to tell those stories. But engage some new kind of study because honestly, I think most of the people in our churches are just bored. You know, my brief career in athletics was in football. I'll tell you this, the one place I never wanted to be One place I never wanted to be was on the sideline. I wanted to be in the game. Now there's a place for the sideline. It's where you get patched up and encouraged and sent back out onto the field, corrected sometimes. But, you know, we managed to turn church life oftentimes into sideline work. Many of our people are just bored and they want to get back in the game. I don't know, have you ever seen The Dog Whisperer? I don't even especially like dogs, but I like this show, The Dog Whisperer, Cesar Millan. I think we ought to get him a chair in one of our seminaries, because this man knows about people. He says the problem with most dogs, most of our house dogs, is that they're just bored. And he says this, you know what happens when a dog gets bored? It puts its nose in the dirt and gets in trouble. Sounds like a lot of people. Sometimes sounds like the church. So, engage in some activities, life-giving activities. There are people who are dying out there for what Jesus has given us to give away freely. Thirdly, it's to get together. We hope that you'll get together with people. Christianity moves at the speed of friendship. I'd like to tell you about Jim Harrington. He'll do one of our workshops. I think Jim, the Baptist pastor here in Houston, he's gotten me connected with lots of people. He's a great matchmaker. I love the guy. Big influence in my life. He got me thinking about just getting connected with other pastors. So this is not me. I'm a pretty reserved kind of person, but I felt called by God to just pick up the telephone and call people. And so I started calling pastors, can you go to lunch? Can you go to lunch? And they all thought I was trying to sell something, or I just wanted to get to know them. And you know, a little while later, some people came to me and said, would you be willing to be involved in a big festival here in Houston? And that led to City Fest Houston that Rich described a few minutes ago. 250,000 people came together. More than 30 schools were impacted significantly, kind of like complete makeovers. 10,000 people received friendship evangelism training. 4,000 people made public confessions of their faith in Christ. It's amazing, and it happened because people got together. So find somebody who's not in your current circle and just start meeting. Go across the street, walk across the room, do something that gets you in a place where God can get a hold of you and your community, the congregation that you serve. Break out of the old circle. We were talking earlier today, get into your outbox, okay? Well, I think if you'll undertake these activities, you'll find yourself propelled out into the world in some extraordinary new ways. And the last of these, of course, is that you simply begin to think and chart for yourself a missional identity. A missional identity. By the time you leave on Saturday, you'll have some definitions of what it means to be missional, so I won't go into that right now. But agree with us to undertake the call to a missional identity. I was thinking, this is certainly the movement of the early church. Started out, Peter, that great sermon, and then the church began to realize that God's call was to a world out there. Their course was just like this, like the movement to the moon. But they kept on the course. They were off course some of the time, but God brought them back on. So establish for yourself this sharper missional identity. I was reading the other day, by the way, that about mid-1970s, I guess, 1975, the airlines started to give away frequent flyer miles. You know how many of those have been given away since 1975? 19 trillion frequent flyer miles have been given away. Do you know how many have been used? 5 trillion. There are 14 trillion unused frequent flyer miles out there in the world. And if that's true of the airline, I can only imagine how much more it's true of what God is inviting us to do and be in the world. He's saying, I have opened the door for you. Go. These things may not seem like very much, you know. I agree, but I think we're being called to a new way of serving, of being the church in the world today. might remember in the mid-1970s, Dick Fosbury decided that he was going to high jump in a new way. The old way was the scissor kick, and they would reach extraordinary heights. Really, I'm so impressed by that. They would jump over, do that scissor kick, chest to the ground, and over the bar, somewhere close to 7 feet off the ground. Really amazing stuff. But then Fosbury came along and said, you know, I think you've gone as high as you can go with the scissor jump. Let's do a flop, which is exactly the opposite. It is to go over the bar with your chest facing upward. There's nothing about it that's logical or makes sense. And it took people a long time to get in the program, but now nobody does the scissor kick anymore. Everybody does the Fosbury flop. And it's time for us as the missional agents of Jesus Christ in the world to begin to approach the bar in a new way. Take time, it'll take effort, we'll be off course part of the time, but keep at it. And don't underestimate these 4 things. I mean, I'll be astonished if there are many in this crowd who can say for themselves personally or for their congregation that they are doing these 4 things right now. We believe that if we take on these 4 activities, it's a starting place. This is as much of the rock as we can see right now. God is going to reveal some things to us that will be compelling. And we'll make some mistakes, but we'll learn some things, and we'll grow. People at NASA made me think of this. You know, they are about to send out into space what they've described as the feeblest spacecraft they've ever made. The feeblest spacecraft they've ever made. See, the big problem with space travel is fuel to get where you're trying to go. The farther you're trying to go, the more fuel it takes. And so this is an effort to get beyond Mars, between Mars and Venus, where there's an asteroid belt, which is of some interest to scientists. So they've devised this spacecraft that will go there, and it's propelled by a new kind of fuel. It only takes 927 pounds of this fuel to get all the way to the region between Mars and Venus. It's amazing, 927 pounds. And it operates on the brilliant theory of slow but persistent acceleration. This spacecraft, once it's in orbit around the Earth, will accelerate at the speed, the incredible speed of 15 miles per day. 15 miles an hour per day. 15 miles, that means it would take 4 days to reach the awesome speed of 60 miles an hour. 15 miles an hour per day. But here's the interesting thing. If you continue to accelerate at that speed for 5 years, if you just keep going a little every day, you will achieve a speed which is faster than human beings have ever created before. And it makes me wonder, if we had started 5 years ago, 10 years ago, with the things that we're talking about now, where would we be? And where might we be if we just started today? And assume that God would take us to a region that we have not yet begun to imagine, but He has. Jesus is who He says He is. He can do what He says He can do. He came here to do what He said He was going to do. And He has honored us with the privilege of serving Him in this way. It's a tremendous honor. We're humbled by it. And we're also the church, which means we've got lots of problems. But nevertheless, God chooses to use us. I think of this whenever I see Itzhak Perlman playing. Maybe you've seen him play the violin. Just an incredible violinist and a great human being. When Perlman, you know, he had polio as a young man. When he comes out onto the stage, he comes out very awkwardly with those metal aluminum crutches, and with braces on his legs. It makes a lot of noise. Actually, it's kind of awkward even looking at him when he's going out onto the stage. He makes his way to the chair, and he awkwardly sits down, and he puts his braces underneath and arranges his legs. Then he picks up that violin. Every time I've ever seen Itzhak Perlman play, he doesn't look at the music. He looks up. And he plays. And it is so beautiful. And the church is like that. We make a lot of noise. We've got lots of problems. We look awkward to the world. The world laughs at us sometimes. But every once in a while, we look up. And the music God brings from us, the world can't resist. Well, here we are, August 2007. We believe a time ordained by God for a course correction. We hope you'll join us. Presbyterian Global Fellowship. Thank you.